Hello, everybody, and welcome to Box Seat Banter. I'm your host, Billy Ballas, a baseball coach and a huge baseball fan. And I'm broadcasting today from the Space Needle in Seattle to talk about the Seattle Mariners. And joining me today, you guys are in for a treat because I have the voice of the Everett Aqua Sox, formerly the low A affiliate of the Seattle Mariners, but recently reclassified to the high A affiliate of the Seattle Mariners. Pat Dillon, who's a huge Seinfeld fan, as well as being a 20th century history buff as well. Pat, welcome to the program.
Wow, Billy, thanks for that introduction. Yeah, I hope I can live up to the hype. But it's good to be with you and excited to talk about the Mariners. I don't think anybody is thinking about baseball a few days before Christmas, but it'll be here. Spring training will be here before we know it, and hopefully, COVID permitting, we'll have some kind of season to follow.
Absolutely, yeah. And being the voice of the minor league team and being involved with them, I'm sure you've seen a lot of talent come through. And maybe as we get to the players, you'll have seen some of them early on in their minor league career, and may have an interesting perspective on that. But before we get to those players, just talking about the organization a little bit. They began as an expansion team back in 1977, but they were not the first Major League Baseball team in Seattle. And Pat, were you around in Seattle when the Pilots were there?
No, but I remember I grew up in Southern California in Santa Barbara. And I remember when I was a kid getting baseball cards, and you'd look on the back and it would say like a player played in Seattle in 1969. I would think, Seattle, they had a major league team. And of course, I moved up here to go to the University of Washington, and being a baseball fan, I was quickly caught up to speed. Yeah, Pilots, they were part of the four-team expansion in 1969, along with Kansas City, San Diego, Montreal, and the National League. But originally, it was only going to be the National League expanding in 1969, with the American League doing so in 1971. But the Kansas City Royals, which had I guess you could call it a major league facility to play in immediately, Municipal Stadium was there. The Chiefs played there, and the Kansas City A's had played there before they went to Oakland. So they were up and ready to go. And there was pressure from a senator in Missouri, Stuart Symington, and he insisted that the American League expand in 1969. So it was good for the Royals. Only problem for the Pilots is they weren't ready, and they had a pretty complicated ownership situation and a substandard facility, a minor league ballpark, six stadium. They tried to get it up to snuff. They were literally pounding nails into the wood bleachers on opening day 1969 to get it up to the required seating capacity. But by the end of the Pilots' first season, they were out of money and they were in big trouble. And at the end of spring training in 1970, all of the Pilots' equipment, they loaded it onto trucks, and the drivers had to wait to be told whether they were going to Seattle or Milwaukee. So, you get Major League Baseball for 1 year, and then the team moves out of town to another city. And luckily they were able to do something about it.
Yeah, it's wild to think about, to imagine the uncertainty in a player, in spring training, not knowing what city you'll be playing in the big leagues that year. Hard to imagine that in today's day, although, maybe I guess the Blue Jays had a little bit of that going on this year. Not knowing if they would play in Toronto or not. But so those Pilots, they mentioned them, they moved to Milwaukee after just 1 year in Seattle. And then Seattle, they went on to build the Kingdome, and there were lawsuits with the American League for breach of contract. And then, the Mariners, as we mentioned, they began playing 77 there in the Kingdome. And they played in the Kingdome until 1999. And then in the middle of the season in 99, they moved into what was then called Safeco Field. Now it's T-Mobile Park. They've been there since 1999. Do people in Washington refer to it as the house that Griffey built?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, you go back to the 1995 season, which was really put the franchise on the map. And while the Mariners were running down the Angels in August and September and wound up winning the division, at the same time, there was a ballot measure to fund a new stadium, what would become originally Safeco Field and T-Mobile Park. Unfortunately, in spite of all the excitement and the Mariners' success, the ballot measure narrowly failed. So they had to find another way to finance the new ballpark, which they did, and thankfully so. And it gave the franchise the revenue streams that they needed to be able to be at least have a chance to be successful moving into the 2000s. Unfortunately, that really hasn't happened yet. But as Mariner fans, we're always hopeful, and there's a lot of young guys in the organization. I think they've made some good decisions, and they've asked us to be patient for a long time. But I think that the Mariners may, in a couple of years, turn into a nice ball club.
Yeah, hopefully. And I mean, I was a 10-year-old kid at the time back in '95, and I remember that what you mentioned there, that the bill failing. I thought the way that I remembered it, you can correct me on this, since again I was just a little kid. I thought that after they had that comeback to then win the West in that 1-game playoff against the Angels, and they had that dramatic 5-game series against the Yankees. I thought it was on the ballot again, and then it passed, but that's not what happened.
I can't remember the specific details. I mean, there were some people that were unhappy that it was originally, well, back then, that even though it was voted down, they found another way to legally finance it. And so, after it was built and people started going to ball games there, I mean, nobody now, or even, 5 years after the ballpark was built, was sorry that it happened. But at the time, there was a little bit of controversy. But, there was even in the early 90s, there was a real danger that the Mariners could have relocated. The stadium in Tampa Bay with Tropicana Field, which was whatever it was called back then. And that place made the Kingdome look like Wrigley Field back in the early 90s. But, you might remember the history that the San Francisco Giants almost moved to Tampa Bay. The White Sox almost went there, and it was looking like the Mariners' days were numbered in Seattle. But interestingly, the fellow who was the state attorney general back in 1970, a man named Slade Gordon, who passed away this year, actually, at the age of 92. He was instrumental in getting the lawsuit going and leveraging the position where the Mariners were born. And then after he had left the United States Senate, he also brokered the deal between the existing ownership and the Jeff Smulyan folks and Nintendo. And Howard Lincoln was the representative of Nintendo, and that's what kept the Mariners in Seattle. And they were on solid ground beginning in 92, 93. And then ultimately they got the new stadium, and then everything was great.
Yeah, and so that 95 team, that was their first division title, the first postseason appearance, and they won the division in the AL West there in 95. A couple years later, in 97. Again in 01, then they were the wild card team in 2000. So that's their 4 playoff appearances in their history. They have not won the AL pennant. They're actually the only team in the bigs to have never won a pennant. And then, of course, without winning a pennant, you can't win a World Series. So they have also not won the World Series. But Pat, as you mentioned, they do have some, they've been in a rebuilding mode. They've had some nice player acquisition, so hopefully those will come to an end soon, and they will win the pennant and possibly a World Series title. But for now, they're without those.
Yeah, it's there's been so much turnover over the years. I think the Mariners, I mean, you just go back and look at the history of it. when Pat Gillett came in as the GM in 2000. You know, the organization wasn't really focused on the amateur draft and player development. I mean, they were. I mean, I think it did have some importance to them, but you know, he went out and made some very shrewd free agent acquisitions, and that team was a loaded veteran club, and from you know, basically, 2000 through the 2002 season, even 2003 after Lou Piniella left, they were still a very good team and could contend for a World Series. And you know, Lou Piniella left under circumstances where he didn't feel like he was getting the support from the front office. I remember infamously, he said he needed a bat in 2002. Needed another bat, never got it. And then Lou was gone after 2002. Bob Melvin came in, and they were still contending in 03. And then after that, with the Bill Bavasi came in as the general manager. I think they thought that they were a player or two away, and so they'd sign a free agent, and it really wouldn't turn into success on the field. And so they had some success later in the 90s with a 500 season when in the 2000s, that is, when Griffey came back in 2009 when Jack Zduriencik was the GM, and they had some success. But it's been up and down, and really over the last, I guess you could say, 10 years, you know, they came close to making the playoffs, but you know, even going into the 2020 season, the abbreviated 60-game season, I think most Mariner fans that follow the team fairly closely knew that, you know, they don't really have a chance to go to the postseason, but we can watch the progress of some of the young guys and root for them and see them develop and improve. And I think we saw that this year. I think we saw that in 2020. Some guys really took a step forward. Guys swinging the bat. Kyle Lewis, Rookie of the Year. I think it's the pitching staff is emerging, and some nice young prospects on the farm. And you know, by 22 or 23, I think we're looking at possibly a contender.
All right, so your history knowledge is clearly coming into play. I'm looking forward to you sharing that with us the rest of the episode. All right, we resume here as we pick up here. Our last episode was about the Dodgers, and we had 3 trivia questions on the Dodgers, as I had 3 guests on that episode. The first trivia question was, Clayton Kershaw was the Dodgers opening day starter 8 times in a row from 2011 to 2018. And the first trivia question was, who was the last opening day starter before Kershaw there in 2010? Pat, do you want to venture a guess on that one?
Oh, no idea.
It was, it would, you really got to be a true Dodger fan to remember this, or if you are a true Dodger fan, you may have tried to forget it. It was Vicente Padilla back there in 2010. He was the opening day starter. And that was a team coming off of back-to-back NLCS visits, and then you rolled Padilla out there for opening day in 2010. The next question was, so we recorded this episode prior to the postseason this year, so the Dodgers had not won the World Series. So the question was, who were the 2 NLCS MVPs in the 2 recent trips that the Dodgers made to the World Series in 2017 and 2018? Pat, do you remember who may have won the NLCS MVP for the Dodgers in those years in 2017 and 2018?
Oh boy, I've got Mariners on the brain, so I don't think I could venture a guess.
Well, I mean, I hate to throw some salt on the wound in terms of the Mariners, but Chris Taylor was actually one of those MVPs. He and Justin Turner, I think, were the co-MVPs in 2017. I think Cody Bellinger in 2018 was the NLCS MVP. And then the final trivia question, sticking with an MVP theme here, who was the only Dodger to win the All-Star Game MVP in this era dating back to 1995?
Well, I know today is Steve Garvey's birthday, and he won it a couple of times, but he wouldn't qualify. Going back to
Correct.
1995, All-Star Game. Uh, yeah, I don't know.
It's a Hall of Famer, but he's not wearing Dodgers cap in the Hall of Fame. He's got a Mets cap in the Hall of Fame.
Mike Piazza.
Yeah, Piazza was the All-Star Game MVP in '96, I think in Philadelphia in his hometown.
Right. Yeah.
All right, so that brings us to this week's trivia question about the Mariners. So we just mentioned that the Mariners, their first postseason appearance was when they won the division in '95, and their last postseason appearance was in '01. So who was their first pitcher to start a postseason game, and who started their most recent postseason game? So two-parter, their first postseason starting pitcher and their most recent postseason starting pitcher. Any guesses on that, Pat?
First postseason in 1995. So that would have been game one against the Yankees.
Mm-hmm.
I think I remember Tim Belcher starting game two. Andy Benes, maybe?
Okay. And again, we'll reveal these answers next week. Good guess there with Andy Benes. I will not say if that is correct or incorrect. And as always, listeners, you can chime in with your answers on Twitter, on Instagram. Again, the trivia question: who is the first starting pitcher for the Mariners in the postseason and their most recent? So Andy Benes, your guess for game one of '95. How about '01?
So it would have been. I know that they lost to the Yankees in game six in '01, which was also the last game that Jay Buhner ever played. And he hit a home run in that game in a loss. I remember that. Game six in the Bronx. I'll just take a wild guess and say Paul Abbott.
Okay. Those are good guesses, and again, we'll reveal the answers on next week's show. Looking at the ownership of the Mariners. So normally I stick more recently, but I'll go back to their original ownership. Danny Kaye he stuck out to me. I don't know what majority owner he was, but entertainer Danny Kaye, who actually grew up in Brooklyn, was a big Dodger fan, was part of that original ownership group of the Mariners. His co-star in White Christmas, maybe you're watching White Christmas this time of year, his co-star Bing Crosby, another big baseball fan, had an ownership stake in the Pittsburgh Pirates for many years. So I don't know how many movies star two baseball owners, but I found that pretty interesting. So Danny Kaye, along with some other guys, owned the team from '76 to '81. Then George Argydos owned the team from '81 to '89. Jeff Smulyan then owned the team from '89 to '92. And then the Nintendo Corporation, the video game corporation, owned the Mariners from '92 to 2016. And now John Stanton is the current owner of the team. Pat, do you have any thoughts or opinions on any of these ownerships groups?
Yeah, George Argyros, he was an interesting case. His whole approach was being fiscally austere. So he was kind of a penny pincher. But the thing that stands out of my mind was 1987 when at the draft, Ken Griffey Jr. was going to be the number one pick in the country, and for very good reason. But they were going back and forth whether they were going to take Ken Griffey Jr. or take Mike Harkey, a right-handed college pitcher. And Chuck Armstrong, who had been brought into the organization from George Argyros' other business interests and was the team president for many years and did a terrific job. He led the influence campaign to have them make the right decision and take Ken Griffey Jr. And of course, it worked out very well. Jeff Smulyan, who came in 1989, he was he seemed to be a very heavily leveraged major league owner. He had made his money by owning radio stations, and he would talk to the media, and he came out publicly and around 1990, 1991, he would say things like, we want to re-sign Ken Griffey Jr. when he becomes a free agent, but we don't want to have high school players with him in the outfield, which suggested that they didn't have the money, and they really didn't. And they were in trouble. And thank goodness, uh, uh, Senator Gordon and Nintendo and Howard Lincoln got together and got Mr. Yamauchi of Nintendo to purchase the majority interest in the team, and that really saved baseball in Seattle. And of course, now with John Stanton, he bought his way in. He's running the show. We had a chance to meet John a year ago. Our club, the Everett Aqua Sox, was invited down to a suite the night that Zach Greinke almost threw a no-hitter against the Mariners. But it was nice to visit with him, and they have a very patient approach now. And again, I mentioned it earlier, but this is unlike any Mariner organization that we've ever seen. It's always been the just one player away and let's shoot from the hip. And now, through player development and some of the people in the front office, I think under John's leadership, they're putting their best foot forward to make sure that this is done the right way. And in a couple of years, maybe by 2024, we can say that the Seattle Mariners have got the monkey off their back and not just got to the World Series, but won it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so let's look at some of the GMs. Now they had Woody Woodward. He was the GM from 89 to 99. So he was there at the helm for those division title teams there in 95 and 97. And Pat Gillick, the Hall of Famer. I'm not sure if he's in the Hall of Fame, but he probably should be. He's had a lot of success in a lot of places. He was there from 2000 to 03. He was there at the helm in 01 when they won those 116 games. But yeah, unable to really maintain that as you mentioned there, they couldn't get those bats that Piniella wanted, and they couldn't get back to the postseason. Bill Bavasi, I think he's got a lot of front office in his genes, right? The son of Buzzy Bavasi.
That's true.
He was the GM from 03 to 08. And then Jack, you just mentioned this off air. You mentioned in the previous segment. Help me again with his last name.
Zduriencik.
It's that's. We'll call him Scrabble, since that last name will get you a lot of points on Scrabble. Jack Zduriencik. He was the GM from 08 to 2015. Then Jerry Dipoto, former reliever. I know he pitched for the Rockies. He was in Anaheim, I think, before this, correct?
Yep.
He's been the GM at the front with Seattle from 2015. He's I think he's we'll get to one of his good friends in the next little segment here, but so he's been the GM since 2015. So you've mentioned a little bit about a couple of the GMs, but any other thoughts on the GMs overall in this span?
Yeah, Woody Woodward, a terrific guy. Of course, he was a big league player himself with the Reds. He brought Lou Piniella in, and so that changed the face of Seattle Mariner baseball. The Mariners in 1992 almost lost 100 games, and in doing so, they got the number one pick and took A-Rod, so that was nice in 1993. But brought Lou in, changed the culture, and then he was at the helm when they were making a run in 94 for the strike-shortened season. There were 2 games behind the Rangers when things stopped. 95, obviously, the season started late because of the strike, and he was there the whole ride in August and September and throughout the playoffs. And then, the offensive teams that they had 96 and, the 96 team had a terrific offense, didn't make the playoffs. 97, they won the division, lost in the first round to the Orioles.
Mm-hmm.
And then 98 and 99, they were under 500. But then Woody was gone. And I think Woody, it was 11 seasons as the GM. He would always say in kind of a happy-go-lucky way that he was not going to be the general manager who traded Ken Griffey Jr. and it turned out that he was not. And then Pat Gillick came in, and Gillick, through free agency, almost exclusively built those teams in 2000 and 2001 that were very close, but no cigar. And I think, I just remember as a Mariner fan, thinking back into the early 2000s that it was too bad that Pat Gillick and Lou Piniella had to leave, because they had the attitude and the organization and the respect to be able to carry things forward. But you can go back to the late 90s where Griffey was going to leave one way or another. But you think about if he had stayed, and if A-Rod had stayed, and in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, I think that when the clock was ticking, you knew one of them would leave, but not both of them. But they turned Griffey into Mike Cameron. And right. Cammy was great and loved by the fans and very productive player. A-Rod left through free agency, so they got draft pick compensation. But you go back into the 90s, Tino Martinez was a wonderful player, and right. They had to move him because they weren't going to be able to pay him. And at that time, they were still playing in the Kingdome. And then, of course, Randy Johnson. Randy Johnson was flipped for Freddie Garcia and John Halama and Carlos Guillen. All three of those guys played major roles on the 2001 team that won 116 games. But you look back to the composition of a championship roster, and just moving forward, if they could have hit the ground running at the new ballpark with Griffey, A-Rod, Tino Martinez, Randy Johnson, anybody else that the organization could have developed. You think for a moment what might have been. Obviously, it's, looking back a little bit too far, but with the success that they did have in the short run of the early 2000s, and then after that, not too much, things could have played out differently. But as it was, Mariner fans didn't have anything to cheer about as far as going to the postseason up until 1995. And then, they were pretty good for a while until 2001, 2002. And after that, it's just been, it's been a long time.
Yeah. All right, now let's take a look at the managers. I've got a little tidbit on the managers. See if you can identify the manager based on this fact I've got about him. There's a manager who won the Rookie of the Year and the Manager of the Year, not in the same year, of course, but he won both of those awards. Who could that be?
Lou Piniella, final answer.
That's right. Nowadays, or at least I guess he's retired now, but in the 90s and 2000s, he was such a character as a manager. Some of the younger guys, they don't realize, how good of a player he was on those, Yankees teams in the 70s. But yeah, he was Rookie of the Year. He managed the team from 93 to 02. So he was there for all of their postseason appearances. Now they had a manager who I think I used this tidbit before in a prior podcast, but it was too good not to use again. As a player in the offseason, he interned at Bear Stearns.
Oh, boy. Well, that sounds like Bob Melvin.
It is. So he was the manager there in 03 to 04. I think it was his first managerial position. He went on a couple other places. Now he's back in the division in Oakland. There was another guy who predicted that Ichiro, before Ichiro came over stateside, he thought that Ichiro would be a fourth outfielder in the big leagues. Do you know who had
A,
that
Mar- a,
prediction?
Mar- a Mariner manager made that prediction.
Well, he was not. He made the prediction prior to him being a Mariner manager.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Mike Hargrove.
Yep. Human rain delay, for those who may remember watching him play. He was the manager from 05 to 07. I'm not sure if he was the because I know he managed Cleveland earlier. He may have been with Cleveland, when Ichiro was being scouted and posted and coming over here. So, but yeah, he thought Ichiro would be a fourth outfielder in the big leagues.
And another former Mariner manager who was also a Rookie of the Year.
That's correct. And he, I think he won a Manager of the Year in not the main one, but he won a different Manager of the Year award. I tried to see if Piniella was the only one to win both. I was unable to verify that information, but yeah, Hargrove was another Rookie of the Year winner. Now they had a manager who in his managerial career has managed in 3 different seasons for 2 different teams, but has fewer than 162 career games managed.
Ooh. That is interesting. Boy, you got me there.
John McLaren.
Okay. Yeah, John McLaren. Yeah.
Yeah. So
he took over, I think, when Hargrove was let go.
Yeah, he took over in 07.
And then he stayed there for a while, and that was before Wakamatsu got hired. But I think after that it was Jim Riggleman.
Yeah. So yeah, it was
at the end of that season.
Yep. So McLaurin managed in parts of 07 and then into 08, and then he did not finish 08. Jim Riggleman then managed the rest of 08. And then you just mentioned this guy. He was a high school teammate in baseball and football with Jack Del Rio, who would go on to, play collegiately at SC, played in the NFL, then head coach in the NFL. So interesting that a high school produced a major league manager and an NFL head coach. He was also the first Asian American manager, and you just mentioned him, Don Wakamatsu.
Yep.
And then he was there. So from 09 into 2010, then Darren Brown finished up in 2010. Then they had a manager who managed in the big leagues, although he is the current head coach at his alma mater, Wichita State.
Yeah, Eric Wedge.
Yep. So he was there 2011 and 2013. As we're getting down this list, we've had a lot of turnover here at the manager helm in Seattle. This manager also managed in Pittsburgh and in Detroit, but the Mariners are the only team that he has a winning record with. And he was also up for the Mariner job prior to this, but that time it went to Eric Wedge. And then after Eric Wedge was let go, this man ended up getting hired.
Yeah, Lloyd McClendon. They were pretty. I remember the first year they were pretty good. I think they were still well out in the division. I can't remember them really being in the wild card chase towards the end of the season that year. That was a little bit later in 2018. Lloyd McClendon, only 2 seasons.
Yep. And then their current manager, his post-playing career, he went from the front office to managing. So he was in the front office in Texas, the director of player development, and in Anaheim, he was the assistant GM. And then now he is the manager in Seattle. So who would that be?
Yeah, Scott Service, a good guy, good manager. I think he's popular with the media. He's popular with the fans. He certainly had some lasting power. I think coming up now, it's going to be his 6th season. I thought he did well with the club last year that whatever they were, 6 games under 500 in the abbreviated season. I think he has the clubhouse, he has the players' respect. He's a good manager. Glad to have him here.
And yeah, he's very close with Jerry Dipoto. The two of them are good friends. So I imagine it's helpful to have that cohesiveness between the front office and the field manager, so that they're on the same page there. I think if you look in the same division in Anaheim, there's always been a disconnect there between the owner and the GM and the manager, and it has not worked out well. So if they're able to be cohesive there and have some stability, because if you look at this manager list, they've had a lot of managers. And then Scott Service, as you mentioned, he's about to start his 6th year. He's finally have some stability. The only other manager on this list to have any sort of stability is Lou Piniella, and that was when they were good. So, hopefully he's the right guy for the job, and he can be there for a while and take them to some success.
Yeah, he's had a couple of winning seasons. They almost won 90 games 2 years ago, and they have been in it, and I think that's all that fans are asking for. But when you're a team that is on the cusp, like I think the Mariners are, it's stay the course with who brought you here, and I certainly think another nothing is forever, but these guys, the current administration deserves a chance to see what they can do with the young players that they have acquired. There have been some really nice trades that Jerry has made, and see what they can do in next year and in 2022 and moving forward into the future.
Absolutely. So that's the front office, the field managers and the owners. And then now in just a moment, we will look at the players in the past 25 years. It is time to look at the roster I have created for the Seattle Mariners, and it's pretty appropriate that this project is going back 25 years, starts in 1995, because that is such a banner year for the Mariners. And a quick reminder to all the listeners how this project works. So we go back 25 years to 1995. You pick one player per year from the organization. You cannot repeat players, and you must form a coherent roster. So starting here at the catching position, I got Dan Wilson from 1996. He was worth about 3.5 wins. Solid with the glove back there. 2.2 wins defensively. He hit 18 bombs that year. 285. He's slightly below average with the stick at OPS plus at 95. But like I mentioned, solid with the glove, had a little bit of pop. Moving to first base, John Olerud, a state of Washington legend. He returned to Seattle to play baseball after playing in Toronto, in New York. I got him in 2002. He was worth just over 5 wins. Almost a 3-4 500 triple slash guys. He hit 300, got on base at a 403 clips, and slugged 490. He was a Gold Glover that year, 22 home runs, over 100 driven in, walked 98 times. Then at second base, Brett Boone in 2001, worth 8.8 wins, led the league with 141 driven in. He hit 37 home runs, huge production there from the second base position. He hit 330, 372, 578. Good for a 950 OPS and a 153 OPS plus. So huge production there. He was an all-star and a silver slugger. By the way, Dan Wilson was an all-star that year in 96. Then at third base, Adrian Beltre in 2008, worth about 5.5 wins, 25 home runs. Not his best average that year, but he was real solid at the hot corner. He won the Gold Glove that year, then finishing up the starting infield. A-Rod in 2000. There's a lot of years to pick from A-Rod there. I went with 2000. He was worth 10.4 wins, 41 home runs, 132 RBIs, stole 15 bags, walked 100 times, triple slash of 316, 420, 606, OPS plus of 163. He was an all-star and a silver slugger. So another time you're getting huge offensive production out of a premium defensive position. Pat, what do you got on these infielders here? They look, I mean, it looks pretty solid.
Yeah, I remember the day in 1996 when Dan Wilson, he had 18 home runs that year. He had a 3 home run game at Tiger Stadium. And I remember listening to it on the radio, driving around town, and Mariner, former Mariner broadcaster, Hall of Famer Dave Niehaus was just going bananas after the third one, especially. It was great having Olerud on the club, a guy that won a batting title and was so slick around the bag. And when he was at Washington State, he played for Bobo Brayton. He was a two-way player. He played first, and he was a really good college pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
Brett Boone came up with the Mariners through the organization, went to San Diego, and then came back. And that 2001 season, not only did he 331 and he hit the 37 home runs, and you mentioned the RBI, but Brett was also a very good defensive second baseman. Adrian Beltre at third base came along at a time where that he was signed as a free agent by Bill Bavasi the same year that Richie Sexson came into the organization, and Sexson obviously didn't have the success that Beltre had, but Beltre was a fan favorite. A-Rod, what can you say about him? 2000 turned out to be his last season with the team. I think back to his 1996 campaign, where he probably should have been the MVP that year. Well, almost won the batting title.
He did win the batting title. Didn't he?
Did he win the batting title in 96?
I think he had like 356 to win the batting title.
58, 358. Yeah. We can look it up.
Yeah. He right. The only reason he did not win the MVP was because somebody left him off the ballot entirely, because he thought A-Rod was the 2-hitter, and the guy thought that, the 2-hitter is not the MVP.
Well, I mean, the numbers tell a different story. At any rate, Juan Gonzalez, I think, won it that year.
He did.
And it was a very close vote. There's your infield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now as we move to the outfield, in left field, I know they cycled through a lot of left fielders in the 90s. I went back to 2015 to find Nelson Cruz, who was worth just over 5 wins, hit 44 bombs, triple slash of 302, 369, 566. He was an all-star and a silver slugger. I know his best position is DH, but he did play outfield that year. He played right. I'm sticking him in left here. And he's his weakness is with the glove, but he's here for his bat. But then in center field, there's only one guy to choose. The only decision is what year are you going to take him. I went with 1997 for the kid, Ken Griffey Jr. That was his MVP year. He was the MVP, an all-star, a gold glover, and a silver slugger. Led the league in runs with 125. Home runs and RBIs with 56 and 147. His triple slash of 304, 382, 646, with that 646 slugging leading the lead. He also led the league in total bases and was intentionally walked 23 times, which led the league. Then in right field, you've got Ichiro from 04. So not his rookie of the year and MVP season, but in 04, he was worth 9.2 wins. That was the year when he broke George Sisler's single season hit record, as Ichiro had 262 hits. He hit 372, and he was intentionally walked 19 times, which led the league. So he led the league in hits and batting, as well as intentional walks. He was an all-star and a gold glover. Then as we round out the starting lineup, at DH, there's only one DH to choose when you're talking about Seattle, And that's the man that the award for the best DH in the league is named after, Edgar Martinez. I took him in 98. He hit 322, 429, 565 with that on base of 429, leading the league. Walked over 100 times. He hit 29 bombs, drove in over 100. So again, a lot of offense there with Cruz, Griffey, Ichiro, and Edgar there, rounding out the starting lineup.
Yeah, the thing about Nelson Cruz, I mean, I think early in his career, just from a defensive standpoint, I mean, I think he was probably more than adequate. Just as when he was with the Mariners, of course, he may have been a liability in the outfield, but I think that they were just worried that he would hurt himself chasing after fly balls or diving for fly balls, and they needed his bat in the lineup. Griffey, what can you say? I mean, I was living in the Seattle area when they drafted him. I remember his first at bat in the big leagues against Dave Stewart, double off the left center field wall. Hit that rookie year. He missed some games due to injury. Then how he just progressively got better by his age 23 season. He added even more power, and some of those doubles started turning into home runs. And then, 95, he gets hurt. He smashes into the wall, breaks his wrist, misses a couple of months, and then he's just instrumental down the stretch in 1995. But it's interesting that he only had the one MVP. Probably could have won it in a couple other years too, but just absolutely monster numbers. He'd have 56 home runs the next year too in 1998.
Right.
Ichiro, just took the area by storm. All the Japanese media that would follow him around. I was lucky enough to be in the ballpark opening day of 2001. It was freezing. It was like in the low 40s. We were sitting in the upper deck in left field, and I witnessed his first ever big league hit, which was a single up the middle. And then I was there for the final game of the season in 2004 when he got base hits 261 and 262. So never forget that. And then Edgar Martinez, great career, Hall of Famer. Great to see him finally get in there. They named the award after him, as you mentioned, and has the biggest hit in Mariner history.
That's right.
Talk about the double and the off Jack McDowell and Joey Cora bunt base hit. Griffey, the base hit to right center, got Cora to third, first and third. Edgar was at the plate. He had struck out in his previous at bat against Jack McDowell on a splitter. Went up there, took a fastball for a strike. It was 0-1. Looked for the split, got it. It was up. Ripped it for the double. Griffey scored the winning run. That's how it ended.
Yeah, and I mean, I've mentioned earlier, I was 10 years old at the time, and I mean, I was just in love with that Mariners team. Griffey, my favorite athlete of all time. I mean, I could talk an entire podcast about him, and I remember watching that game. I was at our church fundraiser, our Greek festival at my church. And it was that Sunday night. We used to have it in that first weekend of October, and watching it on a black and white portable TV with a screen about, 2.5 or 3 inches and across, and trying to see it best as I could. And as that ball rattled around in the corner and Griffey came home, and it's just that iconic image of Griffey at the bottom of the dog pile with that huge smile. I mean, Griffey was just a joy to watch because he had so much fun out there playing. And yeah, he won the MVP award there in 97. That was when they won the division. The voters, they love giving the MVP to a playoff team. And yeah, Griffey had pretty much identical numbers the following year. I think 56 and 147 again. But, the Mariners were not a playoff team in 98, so Griffey was not rewarded in the postseason voting like he was this year. Probably could have or should have won more than that one MVP award. But I mean, he's an all-time great inner circle Hall of Famer.
Absolutely, and no question about his training techniques or the stuff that he's putting into his body either.
Right. Yeah. And I wonder, I mean, I don't know how all the numbers and the stats work when you're talking about WAR, the wins above replacement, because he was playing at a time where the offensive numbers were, inflated, and his were coming naturally, but everyone else, that he's competing against has inflated numbers. And I don't know how it works. Like if they were clean and had, if their numbers were natural and if Juan Gonzalez, I don't know who was on the sauce at the time. I don't want to put any allegations out there to my millions of listeners, but if other guys who were cheating had lesser numbers, does that increase Griffey's WAR? I don't know how it works, but regardless, he was a tremendous player and a joy to watch. Then as we get to the bench here to wrap up the position players, the backup catcher, Mike Zunino, I got him in 2017. He had some pop that year, 25 bombs, hit just 251, 331, 509. Robinson Cano, as we talk about steroids users, his career has now been tarnished, but in 2016, he had a solid year, 7.3 wins. He had 39 bombs, drove in over 100. Just a nice, smooth, sweet swing there from the left side. Another left-handed infielder, Kyle Seager in 2014 over there at third base. He was worth 6.3 wins, 25 bombs. He was an all-star and a Gold Glover that year. Then a defensive replacement in the outfield. Your mind would probably go to Mike Cameron first, but couldn't fit him on. I got Franklin Gutierrez in 2009. Solid with the glove there in center. He was worth 6.6 wins overall. I think this was his career year. He was slightly above average with the stick. And then you combine that with elite defense there in the outfield. A solid year from him. So my thought process is kind of, get Nelson Cruz out there to start. And then you've got Gutierrez out there to spell him. And then with Gutierrez, Griffey, and Ichiro in the outfield, I mean, nothing is falling in. Any final thoughts on these bench pieces or the position players overall?
Well, sure. I mean, the criteria that you chose, Billy, is good. You got to choose the best season at each position, and at catcher for Mike Zunino, that 2017 year is a big outlier because he hasn't really come close to achieving that kind of offensive production. We know what he can do back at the plate, and Mike is a terrific guy. We had him in Everett in 2012 when he was the first round pick, and we had him for a little bit over a month, and he was just a terrific guy and an even better player. Robinson Cano was a former Aqua Sox too. We had him on a rehab after he had to serve his suspension in 2019 for his first violation of the substance abuse policy. And he gave our fans a thrill, hit a couple of home runs, and he was starting at second base in a series that the club really needed to win. So he helped us out a little bit. And then Kyle Seager, probably depending upon how things pan out, but he's coming to the end of a contract. So this will likely be his final year with Seattle going into 2021. And then Franklin Gutierrez, he had the nickname, Dave Niehaus nicknamed him Death to Flying Things.
Yeah.
So he could go get it in the outfield. They had a giveaway at the ballpark. Fans got a Franklin Gutierrez fly swatter.
That's great.
The Death to Flying Things fly swatter.
That's great. So yeah, there we go. And then now we'll get to the rotation and the pitching staff. And I mean, when you start with the pitching staff in Seattle, there's one name that comes to mind for me, and that's Randy Johnson. Got him in '95, so that was that abbreviated year. I think they played 144 games. He went 18-2 that year with an ERA of about 2.5, which led the league. He struck out 294 guys, 294 guys in just 214 and a third innings. He had 6 complete games, 3 shutouts. But the 294 strikeouts is absurd in that short of games. He also led the league in ERA plus, FIP, WHIP, hits per 9, home runs per 9, walks per 9. That was the most in the league, so that was a negative one. Strikeouts per 9 and strikeouts per walk. He was a Cy Young winner and an all-star that year. Jamie Moyer in '99. So you go from the flamethrower lefty Randy Johnson. Now we've got the soft thrower lefty Jamie Moyer. He went 14-8. His ERA was just under 3.9. It'll give you a lot of innings. He had 4 complete games, almost 230 innings that year. Then King Felix in 2010, his Cy Young Award-winning year. He only went 13-12, but that was not his fault. He had a phenomenal year. That was when the writers started realizing that, wins are not the be all end all for rating pitchers. His ERA led the league at 2.27. He led the league in innings pitched at 249 and 2/3. And in hits per 9 at 7 hits per 9. He was a Cy Young, as I mentioned. Hisashi Iwakuma in 2013. He went 14-6 with a 2.66 ERA in almost 220 innings. He was an all-star. Then rounding out the rotation, Michael Pineda in 2011. He was just 9-10. His ERA was 3.74. He did strike out about a batter an inning, had 173 strikeouts and 171 innings as he started 28 games that year, and he was an all-star there. So, Pat, what do you got on this rotation here?
Well, Randy Johnson, just otherworldly. I mean, you look at some of the other years where he was close. I think in his Mariner career, he finished second in the Cy Young voting in a couple other years.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that turned his career around, or at least one thing that had a big influence over it, was when he got together with Nolan Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was either in '92 or I think it was late in the '92 season, maybe it was '93. And it was a mechanical thing where Randy was landing on his right heel, and Nolan just sought him out and said, hey, I think I can help you out. And they made a big deal about it in the media, and almost overnight, things changed for Randy. I mean, you go back and look in the early '90s, some of his walk totals. I mean, he led the league in walks 3 years in a row. He walked over 150 batters in 1991. He'd be a high pitch count guy. He'd be over 100 pitches by the 5th inning.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a slightly below 500 pitcher early in his career, but he put it together, and kind of like Sandy Koufax in that big fastball from the left-hand side. But Randy could get major league hitters out anytime he wanted with 2 pitches, fastball, slider. That's it. That's all he needed. And once he started throwing strikes, just phenomenal. And what he was able to do in that '95 postseason, especially in Game 5 against the Yankees, coming out of the bullpen on short rest, keeping them in the game that they eventually won. Jamie Moyer, real popular player in Mariner history, a couple of 20-win seasons outside of that nice year he had in 1999. He held a lot of the franchise records that were since eclipsed by Felix Hernandez. And that Felix season in 2010, we weren't so sure as Mariner fans if he was going to win the Cy Young Award. Thank goodness that he did. But so many times over the years where Felix would allow, one run or less through 7 innings, and he'd walk away with a no decision. He'd pitch well and lose, but you look at the peripheral numbers. We had Felix and Everett too as a 17-year-old back in 2003, competing against much older competition. You could see the kind of competitor and just skillful pitcher that he was going to turn out to be. But so that was great. Sashi Iwakuma was happy when the Mariners signed him. He had a great year that year, and it was nice seeing him throw that no-hitter against the Baltimore Orioles at home.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Pineda, just a big, strong athlete with a blazing fastball. So I think you did well there choosing all those seasons.
Yeah, and I want to correct myself. I think Johnson did not lead the league in walks that year. But yeah, you mentioned that discussion with Nolan Ryan, and you look at his walks per 9. Yeah, he was in in 91, he almost 7 walks per 9, and in 92 over 6. So then he cut that down to 3.5 in 93, and then that was when things really clicked. He had a stretch where he was 2nd, 3rd, 1st. Then he missed time in 96. Then 2nd and 7th in Cy Young Award voting. And really in 98, the only reason he was 7th was because he was traded midseason from Seattle to Houston. And that 7th was in his abbreviated dominant time with Houston. Then, of course, he won those 4 Cy Youngs in a row in Arizona. But yeah, once things clicked, he was just dominant. And a real, that moment you mentioned in 95, he won that playoff game in dominant fashion against the Angels, the 1-game playoff to get into the postseason. Then he could not start game 1 since he just pitched that game, but then I think he pitched game 3. Then he came out of the bullpen
on game 5
in a short rest. Yeah.
The thing about Randy too, is that he had some back problems,
mm-hmm.
and so he missed some time in 1996. He made a Northwest League rehabilitation assignment with the Aqua Sox in 96. And the Mariners' contract time was coming up, and I think they just decided they were going to sell short on him. I mean, they wanted to maybe do something, but they were worried about that. I mean, they were able to move him to the Astros for a real nice haul. But Randy, the first part of that 98 season, wasn't real happy in Seattle. Mm-hmm. And the change of scenery, when you look at the difference between what he did the first half of 98, second half, it's like night and day. I mean, he was dominant.
Yeah.
And other note on Randy is all the games that he won after he turned 30.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he got to 300 wins barely, but he had to pitch until he was 45 years old to do it.
Yeah. And all right, let's look at the relievers now, which was kind of the weak point of those mid-90s team, the kind of the back end of the rotation and then the relievers. But here we're able to cherry pick some relievers and hopefully get a good bullpen. We'll start with Shigetoshi Hasegawa in 2003. His ERA about 1.5. Not a lot of strikeouts, but he kept the ball in the yard. 16 saves in 73 innings there. And yeah, I mean, what else can you say? But you prevent runs and a 1.5 ERA, that's pretty good. Edwin Diaz in 2018, he was worth 3.3 wins. He had a sub-2 ERA, led the league with 57 saves, and he struck out 124 dudes. So, Hasegawa might not be striking everybody out, but if you need a K, you can bring Diaz in. Tom Wilhelmsen from 2012, ERA at 2.5. He had 79 in a third inning, struck out 87 guys, so just about 10 Ks per nine. And JJ Putz in 07, ERA under 1.5. He closed 40 games. He was worth 4 wins. Struck out, 10.3 batters per nine. So a lot of closing experience there. And I know that, WAR is not, first of all, it's not the stat there's no one stat that is you can look at and just point to that, but that does encompass the most. But it is not the best measure for relievers because it's a counting stat. But when you're a reliever and you're amassing 3.2, 3.34 wins above replacement, that's pretty absurd. Moving along, we've got Everyday Eddie Guardado, the lefty from 05. He had an ERA under 3. Rafael Soriano in 06, ERA of 2.25, striking out almost 10 per 9. Then finishing up from 2019, lefty Roenis Elias. His ERA was 3.64, but he did save 14 games. Struck out 45 in 47 innings, so about a batter an inning. The thing that pops out here is just, you got a lot of closers to choose from, and most of them are, I guess all of them are from, post 2000. So what are your thoughts, Pat, on this bullpen?
Yeah, Shiggy Hasagawa, ground ball guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking at the numbers here. So 73 innings in his 63 appearances. And, he finished 36 games too, but, solid. Just throw a guy out there, eat some innings. You want to be a bridge to the back end of your bullpen, and he certainly accomplished that. Edwin Diaz was a prospect coming up through the Mariner organization and as a starting pitcher, and he was in Double-A in 2018. And they thought, well, let's call this guy up and throw him in our bullpen and see what he can do. And it turned out to be just a phenomenal season, and 57 saves, which I believe is a club record. And of course, he went on to the Mets and that Robbie Cano deal that netted the Mariners a nice return among that. One of the top prospects, Jared Kelenic. Tom Wilhelmsen, he was an Aquasoc back in 2010. He had been out of baseball for a while. He had come up with the Milwaukee organization and got to the big leagues in 2012 and had that year. And it was great to see his success. JJ Putz and Rafael Soriano were in the same rotation with the 1999 Everett Aquasox.
Interesting.
JJ had been a third-round pick of the White Sox, and things didn't pan out for him. He kind of underachieved a little bit and found his way into the Mariner organization and was good as a starter. Had trouble throwing strikes, but then became a reliever. But the thing that really turned his career around was when he learned the split finger fastball. And once that happened, he was that 2007 season. That ranks up as one of the most dominant seasons. 1.38 ERA, walked 13 all year, well more than a strikeout per inning. That's like Dennis Eckersley territory in his prime. Soriano was a position player, and he was in that rotation in the 99 when they converted him to a pitcher. He had been a starter, but then they moved him to the bullpen, and he was pretty solid. So, I like this lineup too. There's a lot of talent as we continue our trip down Mariner history lane.
In putting this Mariners roster together, there's always those decisions that are tough to make. Who makes the cut? Who gets cut? And listeners, if you want to chime in on who I missed out on, how could I have taken this guy instead of this guy, let me know on Twitter or Instagram. It's at Box Seat Banter on both of those platforms. And also, if you want to make a roster yourself, visit the website boxseatbanter.com. there's a link to download a spreadsheet where a template where you can create your own roster. And if you do, whether it's the Mariners or any other organization, feel free to submit that to me. So now, Pat, as we look at this Mariner roster, what are there any names that you may have thought could have or should have been on here that just weren't able to make the cut, or some, guys who made a lot of contributions to the Mariners organizations who are not on here?
Yeah, I mean, pitching wise, and we probably could have thrown a couple of people in there. It's interchangeable. The one guy that is left off offensively that had a huge impact and is a member of the Mariners Hall of Fame is Jay Buhner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Had 3 straight seasons of 40 home runs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he had the strikeouts, but his 96 season was phenomenal.
And as
homers, 138 RBI, hit 271, got on base 37% of the time, won a Gold Glove.
Yeah, as Frank Costanzo will tell you, he had a cannon for an arm.
You're right. It's like he told George, the owner, that he didn't know what the hell he was doing.
Yep. Yeah, we traded for Ken Phelps, right? So, a couple of the names in this organization, Buhner, as you mentioned, and then Randy Johnson, they had some great trades to acquire those players. But yeah, Buhner is definitely a name. Were there any other names?
I mean, that was just the one that I just looking at the roster where you would think that somebody would be included. I mean, I like what you put together here, but that was the one that I would have found a place to put. But other than that, I think everything looks great.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, that Buhner is definitely a character with that shaved head and that goatee and that pine tar stain on his hip. Fun player, a lot of pop, that odd batting stance too, that open stance that he would have.
Yeah.
As a kid, I'm sure a ton of other kids, we would, before the batting stance guy was a thing, we were all mimicking Ken Griffey Jr., but Buhner was another batting stance that I would mimic. So yeah, it was a bummer that I was not able to get him on this roster. Another one of my favorites as a kid, Joey Cora. He's not going to have the numbers that Cano or Boone had, but he was just a fun, scrappy player that would do anything it took to win a ball game. You mentioned earlier, before Griffey single and before Edgar's double, he started it all with that drag bunt. But another fun player that I wanted to mention, probably not good enough for the roster, but somebody who I felt deserved mention here. And then another guy, Mike Cameron, tremendous defensive outfielder. And of course he had that 4 home run game. Was that against the White Sox?
It was in 02.
Mm-hmm. And
he and Brett Boone each homered twice in the first inning.
Unbelievable to go back to back twice in the same inning. And then, he would hit 2 more home runs in the game. His first 4 at bats, he had 4 home runs. And I think he hit one to the track later in the game.
He almost had number 5. If he had just hit it higher, he would have hit it out.
Yeah. So, a lot of pop there. Great defensive center fielder. So those were the guys who I wanted to name who I didn't fit on the roster. Edgar, I couldn't get his best year. I mean, if you look at his stats in 95, they were just ridiculous. But I went with Randy Johnson's huge year that year. So I couldn't get Edgar's best year. But obviously he's on this roster. And then one other name, I was kind of surprised that Freddie Garcia was not on here. He was probably their best pitcher there in 01, but just couldn't figure out a way to get him on the roster. And then the last decision that I had trouble was somebody from 2011. I got Pineda that year. Not the best year for a starter that year in terms of the rotation that I've assembled. That's kind of I felt like the weak spot. Had trouble that year. but those were my thoughts. And Pat, I definitely agree with you on Jay Bone Buhner, missing out on him. And again, listeners, if you want to chime in on the conversation, let me know your thoughts on the guys that I missed out on. Every week, we open it up on Twitter and Instagram for any questions on that team from our listeners. So make sure to follow us on both those platforms. And this week, we had a few questions coming in about the Mariners. First question comes from Charlie Ferreira, who asks, if you had to choose, which pitcher's Mariner career would you keep, King Felix or Randy Johnson? And remember, that's the Mariners career only. So, I mean, King Felix, I know he signed with Atlanta, but he did not pitch this year. He opted out of 2020. So his entire big league career has been with Seattle. And then Randy Johnson, he had, I think, 10 years in Seattle before going on to pitch in Houston briefly, then Arizona, pitched in New York and San Francisco as well, and in Montreal prior to Seattle. But Pat, whose career are you taking between Randy Johnson's 10 years in Seattle or King Felix's? I think he's got 15 years in Seattle.
It's like asking a parent which one of your children do you love more. I think objectively you've got to go to Randy just because of what he was able to do in the postseason, and I feel so bad that Felix never was able to experience that. But both won Cy Young awards with Seattle. Both were over modest stretches, maybe considered to be the best pitchers in baseball. But I guess you think Randy's in the Hall of Fame. Felix probably will not get there. But I would lean towards Randy, but Felix just phenomenal in his own right.
Yeah, and it's they actually have identical ERAs in Seattle at 3.42. Felix has about 8 or several hundred more innings pitched, but identical ERAs. Yeah, they've kind of had opposite careers where, Randy Johnson, he figured it out late. As we look back, he was 29 when he really kind of cut those walks down and for the first time got votes on the Cy Young ballot, whereas King Felix was tremendous when he was younger. And then he's kind of, after he turned 30, he has not been able to sustain it. And I'd probably agree with you just based on what he did for the organization at the time there in the mid 90s and those playoff games that he pitched. I would take Randy Johnson as well. Next question. It's not really a question. A comment comes from Alex Morales. He says, so many topics, such an interesting franchise. Ichiro, Griffey, Edgar, Felix, Randy, Harold Reynolds. I could list another 10 all-timers. Good luck with that roster. But yeah, he brings up an interesting point, how they've had, such talent come through, like some all-time greats, but, have failed to put it together in a single team to kind of get over the hump. Do you have any thoughts on that, on the talent that's come through, but maybe not necessarily the great teams?
Yeah, I just think it's an accumulation of being good enough to get to the next level. And there's so many aspects that go into team building. The best teams are able to build through the draft and international signings, and they're able to supplement through free agency. The best Mariner teams in 2000, 2001 were built largely due to free agency, and it was a time that maybe they didn't think the draft was that important. You sign a type A free agent, you can give up a first round pick. And then the Mariners just had historically for, the better part of 2 decades, just had not had very good success or luck in the draft. I mean, you look back to the Dustin Ackley, and he was the consensus best college hitter when he came out of North Carolina. They took him second overall. That didn't work out. Danny Hultzen out of the University of Virginia, best left-handed pitcher in the draft. They took him extremely high. That didn't work out due to injury. Mike Zunino was a top 10 pick. That didn't work out. We wish Mike the best. When you are building a team over a period of time, you have to win the first round.
Yeah,
and
that's a good point.
I think the jury's still out on some of the choices they've made recently, and we're very optimistic about it as fans. That I think I would point to that, and it's hard. It's hard to get to the postseason and have a successful team. And I think when you are trying as hard as major league teams do to get there, it's really hard to not make the playoffs in 19 years.
Yeah. Although speaking of the draft, are you aware of the break that they had based on the rules when they were able to draft A-Rod?
You took it first over. Yeah, there was remind me about that.
Well, so back then it was the first pick alternated between leagues, the American League and National League. And I think the Dodgers actually had a worse record. And, had there been no alternating league, the Dodgers would have had the first pick.
Right.
And would have taken A-Rod first overall. But instead, the Mariners had it. And so they took A-Rod first overall. The Dodgers then took Darren Dreifert, number 2 overall, who had a decent career, but he's no Alex Rodriguez.
Yeah, well, thank goodness for that. It was fun having A-Rod in Seattle as long as he was here. That's for sure.
Yep. Okay, our next question comes from Matt Hutchison, who asks, does the regular season wins record mean anything without winning the World Series? He's, of course, referring to 2001 when the Mariners tied the Cubs record by winning 116 games, but they lost to the Yankees in the ALCS that year, so they did not win the World Series. So, Pat, what do you think on that one?
Oh, it's certainly an accomplishment. It was a big disappointment that the Mariners. People remember that year they went down to the wire with Cleveland in the first round,
right?
And they had to come back and get one Game 5 at home. Jamie Moyer won games 1 and 5 in that series. But it was an interesting team, and all the offense, and it was their second full season in the new ballpark. You look at that starting rotation. You had some good pitchers. You had a young Freddie Garcia. You had Aaron Seeley, who had a nice year. Moyer, of course. Paul Abbott, who was kind of a reclamation project, who came back off of injury. John Halama was a fifth starter on that club, but you really didn't have a true number one. In fact, that rotation was, basically, some 3s and 4s, and maybe Garcia could have been considered a 2, but hey, they got terrific run support and they pitched well enough to, that team just didn't lose very often. But when you get into the postseason, everything changes, and that's when you have a Randy Johnson, when you have a couple of studs, you can run out there, and then that's when you can really leverage your position. So I think we can analyze why it happened. It doesn't make it any less special, and that the Yankee team in '98, 114. I think that had been the previous record, and the Mariners with 116. I don't know if or when we're going to see that again. That was something else.
Yeah, it was, like you mentioned. I agree with you. It's definitely an accomplishment. It should be celebrated, especially in baseball, because the regular season and the postseason are they're totally different animals, and it's such an accomplishment to be the best team in the major leagues, over the course of 162. And we've seen it over and over again, how much of a crapshoot the postseason is. And it's tough to get there. And then it's tough to win in the postseason in Major League Baseball. So I'm sure, it's a disappointment that they were not able to get to and win the World Series that year in '01. But yeah, that should definitely be celebrated. It means something, but not as much as a World Series title would be. And the last thing I had a question for you. It's something that I think in Colorado people discuss it a lot, how the Rockies are at a disadvantage based on where they play. But what do you think about the Mariners being at a disadvantage for where they play? Not necessarily the conditions of playing in Seattle, but just geographically and having to travel so far. They don't have anybody in their immediate area. I think, is Oakland the closest team that they play?
Probably, yeah.
And I think, when you look at like the miles traveled by each team, the Mariners are always at the top or near the top. And you got to figure that takes on a toll as a player. And I wonder, do you have an opinion on that? Do you think that's plays to a disadvantage to them?
I mean, I think you could ask the players and the coaching staff, and for comparison's sake, maybe a player who had played for another team that was centrally located, and what they notice the differences are. I think that the players just focus on what's in front of them, and if they're on an airplane for another couple of hours, I don't think it makes that much of a difference. But no matter how long you are traveling, the frequency of travel tends to wear on players over the course of the season. And you're fresh at the beginning, but come August, September, it can be excruciating. I'm sure. I've ridden my fair share of minor league buses over 20 plus years. Now that's some real hardship right there.
Yeah.
Hey, you're flying on a charter, and have all your needs catered to, and sleep on the airplane, and yeah, it's different. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I mean, I just think it comes down to what the individuals think. And I don't know that would necessarily be something that would prevent free agents from wanting to sign with Seattle either.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the case, but I just, you're logging so many miles every year, whereas teams in the East and in Philadelphia and New York, they're relatively close to each other. They got road trips that are a short bus ride, or they don't have to get in the air. Whereas Seattle, it's a fairly long flight for pretty much every road trip. So
yeah. I mean, you're in Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. It's real easy.
Yeah, exactly. So those are I appreciate you answering those questions. Those are the questions we had this week, and make sure again to follow on Twitter and Instagram to get your questions in for future programs. Pat, let's grade this Mariners roster now. So first I'll throw it to you if you want to give it a grade, and this is in comparison to all the other rosters that I've created. I know you don't have the luxury of seeing everyone that I've created, but you can hypothesize that. What would you grade this roster if you were to assign it a letter grade, and maybe discuss the strengths and weaknesses of it? What do you think?
So we're talking about, again, just for clarification, the two rosters that you created at each position, correct?
Yeah, just this 25-man roster. How do you think it would do overall? Yeah.
Oh well, I mean, I don't think you could go wrong. I mean, just on its face, an A minus. Depth on the bench, a solid player at every position, bullpen depth and talent, and it always comes down to pitching, right? And the 95 Randy Johnson, 99 Jamie Moyer, Felix, Hisashi, and Michael Pineda. Hand the ball to those guys at that stage in their career every fifth day, and I think good things will happen.
Yeah, this is a rare show, I think, where I actually have a higher grade than my guest. Usually my guest is a bit more homer, and then I come in with a lower grade. But I'm giving this team a solid A. Um, I mean, you've got uh, you offensively, the rate stats are okay. You've got good speed, great defense, and then you've got a lineup that you can stack Ichiro, A-Rod, Griffey, Edgar, Olerud. I mean, good luck getting through that lineup. You know, you go left, right, left with those guys. And then that's not even getting to Boone and Beltre and Cruz. So tremendous lineup. Like I said, great defense. Um, the rotation, you've got a couple Cy Young winners there. It's not the deepest rotation, but I think that's offset by some of the huge years out of the pen, and you've got a lot of experience closing. Edwin Diaz at 57 saves, Wilhelmsen 29, 40 from Putz, 36 from Guardado, 16 from Hasagawa. Even Elias had 14. So, I mean, you could really hand the ball to anybody to close the game. And I'm sure, any of them could bridge the gap to get there. With Randy Johnson, you just give it to him for 9 and you don't even have to worry about the pen. But yeah, I think based on all of that, I'm giving them a solid A. Listeners, if you want to chime in, if you want to grade it, go ahead, hit me up on Twitter or Instagram. But yeah, that's the rare time where I give a higher grade than my guest.
Oh, like I had to dock him down for something. A minus ain't too moldy.
Yeah, you can't be too much of a homer, right? As an announcer, I'm sure you can't be too much. You gotta be fair and even, right?
Yeah, I'll give the 75 Cincinnati Reds an A. I'll give the 27 Yankees an A.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, there it is. And again, chime in on social media if you guys want to grade the roster. Pat, it's been great talking the Mariners with you. You've had a lot of great insights. And as we wrap up, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on the Mariners, on the organization, or anything else you want to share about them.
We talked a lot about roster construction and with this team and the optimism and the draft. And you look back over going back to 2016 and when the Mariners took Kyle Lewis in the first round. And he was the Golden Spikes Award winner, and he had the catastrophic knee injury, which I unfortunately witnessed in a game at our place in 2016. But he made the full recovery and is the reigning Rookie of the Year. So you got Kyle Lewis; he's a big league guy. Next year they draft Evan White. Gold Glove winner, needs to get his average up above 200. It certainly has some power. So both those guys are in the plans of this team moving forward and will be part of the next Mariner postseason team. And then the last 3 years, they've taken college pitchers in the first round. Logan Gilbert in 2018, George Kirby in 2019, Emerson Hancock in 2020. And that's to go along with some of the other emerging talent that they have. It's just a very good time to be a Mariner fan. Julio Rodriguez, once he gets the big leagues, Jared Kelnick, the sky's the limit for these guys. These guys could be the next Buners, Griffeys, Ichiros, Boones, and Olaruds, and maybe they will be playing in the World Series. But I guess the more I think about it, the more I talk about it, the more excited that I get, and wishing and hoping that the Mariners have all kinds of success moving forward.
Yeah, a lot of reason to be excited for the future. As we look at the past, there's a lot of excitement to discuss because when you look at this organization, yeah, they have not won a pennant, but they have been worthy of discussion because they've had arguably the greatest player, I mean, arguably in history, definitely arguably in this quarter century dating back to 95, greatest player at 4 different positions, Griffey Jr. in center, maybe the greatest center fielder of all time. Randy Johnson on the mound, arguably the greatest starting pitcher, arguably the greatest left-handed pitcher of all time. A-Rod at short, arguably the best shortstop of all time. And then Edgar, a position that has not been around since the start of baseball, but Edgar, arguably the greatest designated hitter of all time. Griffey, Johnson, Edgar are all Hall of Famers. Ichiro, not eligible yet, but he's going to be a Hall of Famer as soon as he's eligible. And A-Rod, would be a Hall of Famer if not for some of the things he ingested over the years. But I don't know when he began that. It seems like he was a different player in Seattle. Seems like he was clean. I don't know, but there's a lot of I don't know what team in the past 25 years can boast that many Hall of Famers. So it's an incredible amount of talent that they've had. They were some of the most fun teams to watch. It's disappointing that they never got over the hump. I think that their location geographically, I think it may come into play. I'm sure there's smarter people than I am who can look into that and study the sleep and the travel and everything. But yeah, as you mentioned, hopefully they can turn it around and get over the hump and return to the playoffs soon. Definitely want them to be more successful than the Astros with everything that's gone on off the field with them recently. Pat, it's been great talking with Mariners with you. I know as an announcer, you've had a couple great ones to look up to, right? Dave Niehaus in Seattle was a tremendous announcer, and I know you. So you mentioned growing up in Santa Barbara. Did Vin Scully have an impact on you as well?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one final thing, I had a chance to meet Vin back in 1998. It was a Saturday at the Kingdome, and the Dodgers were in town for an interleague game, and I wrote him a letter back before email. Maybe email existed, but I didn't have it, and I'm sure Ben didn't have it either. But we made arrangements, and I spent a couple hours with him before and during the game in 1998. It was about a week before our season started, and sometimes people ask if you could meet anyone in history, who would it be? And for me, sometimes your hero is not around anymore, but mine was living, and I had a chance to meet Ben, and he could not have been any nicer. He is the most decent man, one of them anyway, that I've ever met, and it was great meeting him, and it was I thanked him for the influence that he had on me and my career, and I wanted to be a baseball play-by-play announcer, mostly because I wanted to be just like him.
All right. Well, we appreciate that thought. That must have been, I'm jealous of you. I wish I could have had that experience. As you mentioned, he's still around, luckily. So hopefully maybe someday I'll have it. But I think that's we cannot end on a higher note than talking about Vin. So seems like a great place to end. Pat, again, thank you for joining me, talking the Mariners. It has been a pleasure.
Billy, likewise. This time just flew by. Thank you very much.
All right. This is Billy Ballas of Box Seat Banter, signing off.